Firstly, I'd just like to take the opportunity to say thank you to actually embrace working together as a conference topic. And it also looks like I'm the third one after lunch, and it's a bit of decipher the accent. So mine's Australian, so thanks Pat for cutting the way this morning. To provide a little context about my role and what I do, I've got accountability for the health and the safety, shipping, security, environment and assurance at a company called Viva Energy. Who's heard of Viva Energy? No one? Well, if you like to think of Viva Energy as the way I do, we were the company that was acquired by Vitol, or the other way, divested by Shell. So we're the downstream operations, or were Shell's downstream operations in Australia just over a year ago. So we're going through a very, very interesting time, and I will talk about that a little bit today in terms of who are we, how do we do things around here, because we're now Viva Energy Australia. It's also interesting because I'm from the poor cousins, as we call them in Australia, which would be the downstream operations. So it's really great that we're able to share right across the industry, everything from mountaineering to actually downstream. Let's see if this is working. Busy slide, but this is what I'm going to go through today. I really just wanted to create some dialogue, and some dialogue around contractors. So I'm going to really talk about the role of the contractor and their importance. But I'm actually going to touch upon integrated safety. And J&J talked a little bit about this, but I'll present a slightly different model. Then we'll look at some fundamental stages in contractor management, because there are some nuances when dealing with contractors, and they are, after all, a significant portion of the workforce out there. Sometimes when I come to these events, though, I like to walk away with something that's a little practical, because I know when I walk into the office and the guys say, "How was it?" I can talk about a lot of theory, but sometimes they want to know how, or what it looks like, or how I can easily translate that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the translation in the field at very much an execution level, and some of it touches upon what Fon's talked about before. For those of you that like stats, I'm not going to go through too many of them, but I've got some graphs for you to keep you interested. We've talked about OGP data. The 2014 report's out. I'm not sure if many of you see this report, but it's kind of interesting. In doing a little bit of research for this, I was also really, really shocked to find out that Denmark, out of Europe, is really sitting in the 4th quartile in performance. Now, statistics aside and all those challenges and TRIF rate being lagging and all of those factors, I'm not sure if that was a surprise for many of you here today. I'm pretty sure you're competitive, and I'm pretty sure you're not happy about being in that 4th quartile, because it's not a good place to be. But we did start with a vision at the beginning of today, and that vision is, what could we be working together and just taking that line in the sand? So I'm not sure if any of this is a surprise for you, but have a look at the difference between the hours worked by a contractor and the hours worked by the employing company. It's fairly significantly different, yeah? Now have a look, and it's just a TRIF rate, so it's just one lagging indicator. But if you're a contractor, and this isn't just Denmark, this is pretty much around the world, you're 4 to 5 times more likely to be injured if you're a contractor sitting here today than if you are the employing company. So just out of interest, can you put your hands up who considers themselves a contractor in this room today? How many do you think that is? At least 50%? But you're 4 to 5 times more likely, and your people are 4 to 5 times more likely to be injured. And that's a pretty salient point. But not just that, contractors are actually engaged because, you know what, usually pretty damn good at what you do. So working together is about being able to leverage those skills, being able to think about things a little bit differently. And I'm going to actually use a couple of working examples later on in the presentation about how we can think about things a bit differently, and then how we can actually work more effectively in our permitting systems and all the procedures and systems that we do. But let's look at an integrated model around safety. It's really a philosophy or about the way of looking at things. Okay. It's through 3 interconnected lenses, or lens. All right. Cognition. I used to say this was a fancy pants term for what I think and what I feel. The organisation, and in these events we often spend a lot of time talking about that. So it probably won't be a surprise that I'm not going to really talk about that much today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about this social context piece. So I was just watching today about the social context because it's about the norms of the organisation or about the norms that exist. And in Australia, there's this kind of weird phenomenon that at conferences and meetings, no one rushes to the front tables. Oh, hold on. Who's at these tables, right? It happens in Denmark too. Where's the rule for that? How do you guys know where you sit? How come you didn't rush to the front table? Because it's just how you do things around here. So I'm going to talk a little bit through that as well. So let's look at the first lens. And a lot of this is connected to this word called value. Right? What do I actually value? Because it's about what I value. And there is a collective for the business, but I'm just going to talk about it in the context of the individual. It's kind of what I think. It's what I do. It might actually shape the actions that I take. And that's why it's absolutely connected with how my brain's working. And we've got some psychologists here. I think Dr. Rod will be talking later on as well. But the way the brain works is really, really interesting. But what are the values that drive the way we do things? Why do we see the things that we see? So for example, you might have seen in my bio and with my introduction that I do have a deeply personal connection to the delivery of safe outcomes. This is the connection that drives my values. It actually drives my beliefs. I think Fon said a great word about what's possible. And I think working together, this conference today is about where do we start in working together? And how do we actually identify what's possible? Dare I say, beyond zero. So 24 years ago, Kevin was married to my sister. He was the father to my niece and my nephew. He was working as a contractor on a shutdown at a Shell refinery. He was a committed family man. He was a quiet achiever. He was a hard worker, and he did the right thing, like most of our contractors out there. On this day, his work buddy was a little bit late. He wanted to get on with the job. Sound familiar? He went up some scaffolding by himself, which is actually something we probably wouldn't do today. And he didn't know the scaffolding was faulty. And you know what? It hadn't been tagged out. The site knew it was faulty, but hadn't tagged it out. So the platform he was standing on tipped, he slipped, he fell, he hit his head and fell to his death. So why do I share this story? Because this was on a Shell site. Actually, it's now a Viva Energy site. And so this is a pretty extreme example of what's shaped my beliefs and my passions around what I do. But it's also really shaped about what's possible. So rather than looking at the negatives, what can we actually do to make things better? So I think about the intrinsic drivers that really drive what we do, what we believe, what we think, and how we feel. Now, I know we've all moved to 2015, so you probably all have a smartphone, yeah? Everyone get one out. Don't look at your emails, don't look at your texts, but I want everyone to get their smartphone out. Everyone got it out? Turn it on. Have a look at either your screensaver or also have a look at some recent photos. Have a look. So for interest, mine's the Eiffel Tower, all lights are blazing. Wedding anniversary present for my husband. That's what it reminds me of when I'm travelling. All right. What I want you to do, and they've already started doing it at the front, turn to the person beside you and talk about the photo. And I'm going to guarantee no one's got a barrel of oil on as that photo, all right? So I want you to have a quick chat. I want you to share what that means very, very quickly. I want some noise. Now I've got to get you all back, right? So close up your story. So what's the star dance? All right, back here. Remember, I'm the 30-minute centre of attention. Back here. Thank you. I just wanted you to reflect on what's important to you. Perhaps some of these photos represent what you value and what's important to you. And how frequently do you actually reflect on how important that is to other people in your workplace? Do we actually go and encourage in our teams as leaders about why safety is important? It's part of our authenticity as leaders. And we've talked about it for years, of it starting from the top. The Formula One story, why we're working together now. Do you understand what motivates your contractors? Do your teams understand what motivates you? In fact, do you actually share that much with your contractors? And we're going to explore that. So when we talk about alignment, here's the topic that often gets discussed, all those rules and procedures. I think the technical term that Fon's report reflected on was stuff. Is that right? That's the stuff. Really critical. So I'm not saying it's not. It's absolutely fundamental. Highly regulated environments, it's a critical place in which we need to play. But do we often think about it in the context of the people that are using it? Do we think about, do those individuals have a value for the procedure that they're about to use? In fact, did we include them in the drafting of that procedure? Because, you know, they're the ones that are actually doing the tasks that might have a clue about it. They're the ones that may have the sight to understand the context of which they're applying that procedure. So think about it in the context of this management system, the formal rules and the procedures, in the context of that individual and what's important to them. Because that's going to drive the things that you see, the outcomes that you're looking for. And maybe in the context of the discussion today, maybe that might be working together. The last bit around is social context. And I actually don't think it's something that's very often talked about. It's quite underrepresented. I use the example of, well, the empty tables at the front. Now, I know Patrick was a bit of a draw card, but even he couldn't bring the rock star status for everyone running to the front like you get at a concert, right? So we just don't do that. So think about that in the context of the workplace. What are the social norms about the way we do things around here? So Viva Energy was part of Shell, and we're in a unique position to take of what we think is the best of Shell, but perhaps some of those other things we didn't have to take along with us. And one of the things that we did take with us is that we do treat everyone the same, whether you're a contractor or not. Probably best exampled just last week, where I had one of our guys come up to our team to ask them to do a fitness assessment. And they just said, look, I know they're a contractor, but we really value them the same as an employee, so I really appreciate you kind of really looking out for him. So they're some of the things that are important. But one of the other social norms that we have within our business is this concept of the character, or the courage to intervene. So it takes a bit of, in Aussie terms, guts, right? It takes a bit of courage to actually say, hey, I'm a bit concerned about that. But equally, it takes some character for you to accept that someone's kind of pulling you up for something. And so when we moved to the new organisation, it was really important in the drafting of this commitment that we talked about the CEO writing a statement saying, I give you absolute authority to stop any work where you've got a concern for your or someone else's safety. And not only is it authority, but it's expected. And it's these norms that just affect how you do things around here. So I want you to think about those great things that exist within your own organisations about how you do things, but maybe the things that are holding you back as well. And then imagine you're a contractor arriving. How the hell would you know about that? How would you know those things about don't come sit at the front table because it just doesn't look cool, right? What are those things within your organisation? So if you think about these three things in the context of working together, they're not one in isolation, but they're fully integrated. And it starts one person at a time. Each one of you are sitting here today with your own beliefs, your own values. But as a collective, there is a commitment. There's a commitment by your businesses, by the value that you've put into this conference, that together forms that group that you can build your culture. So that's a little bit of the theoretical element. But how does it kind of play in practice? Kind of got a quote there. And it's from a really experienced refinery manager. And it kind of links into a study, Amandio Durante's paper, and they talked about work safety in the context of temporary employment, a la contractors. So it shared the basic conviction that people will work more productively if they think they're safe. Kind of a no-brainer statement, right? Sometimes in academia we do spend a lot of time doing research that comes out with something that kind of makes sense. But what this refinery manager said to me was, we spend all this money with contracts and procurement, and they say they're going to save me all this money, but then it cost me $1,000 at the end of it, and I really don't know what we've even set up to achieve. Does that resonate here? Are you always clear about what you've set up your contractors to do? And in fact, are they always clear? So very quickly, There's 6 steps there, and I'm not going to run through them. You can all read very well, but it's a bit of a recipe. And we've found this to be successful both within our organisation, and we've been doing a lot of work on that at the moment, but it's also found to be really successful in some other companies that have deployed these strategies. So a construction company that had a pretty poor record in Australia back in 2013 really deployed this, along with making sure that they worked very closely with their contractors. In the end, they reduced their injury rates by about 87% in 24 months. And at the same time, they're quoted as saying, "It's not an accident that our safer sites are also our most profitable." So I'm not saying that in this instance it's a complete takeover. It is about how well we work together and in fact leverage the skills and the knowledge of those contractors we've in fact brought in to do the work. And 50% of this room put their hands up and said you were contractors. So imagine the other 50%, the owner companies, how much knowledge you can leverage just in that one instance. And to think about it in the concept of, yeah, but my guy's on the ground, that's all nice, Fiona. It's all theoretical. But how does it actually make sense to me executing on the ground? One of the practical tools that we've got is called the 8 steps for success. And for you engineers there, it's sometimes confronting because it doesn't always follow the 8 steps. I've had a few engineers say, but it's not sequential. No, because it's a little intuitive. Let me walk through the example for this one, and you'll see what I mean by those steps. The example was that we had a pipeline. It needed an upgrade. We'd kind of allocated about 11 weeks for it. And the pipeline was being replaced, and it included work under a live railway track. So we had to bore under that railway track. Complicated, it was in a rail siding, and there were overhead power lines. So normally we would do this work and we'd use a 55-tonne crane. There's a lot of risks, so electrical interfaces, just shoring up the sidings, not letting people have access. We've done a pretty good job, right? But this is a new tool, and what happens is we brought in the crew that were doing the work. And what happened was they said, well, I'm a bit worried about the overhead, a bit worried about the live trains, because you can't stop the train network. And well, we've got this 55-tonne crane, but do we need a 55-tonne crane? So we really leveraged the knowledge and the skills of some of the work that the contractors had done, and they were a trusted contractor that we'd worked with. We changed the crane to a 15-tonne crane with a 4-tonne grip. What happened is that we totally removed the risk around overhead interface. We gave much more access to the rail siding, so we didn't lock that up. It cost a hell of a lot less. And I guess this is the quote. We were in control. We were a lot more prepared, we were less reactive, and we had time to work through the options, because they weren't working through the options on the fly. We removed the need for the crane and eliminated the risks around overhead power lines. So if I talk to our engineering team and I think about that integrated model, I talk to them about, so how do you do things around here? And they say, you know what? This is our best practice for engineering. This is how we do things around here. We don't mandate it. It's not formal. Yes, it's a process, but it's all interconnected. And the reason it's working is because they have a value for it. The last tool I'll talk about, and it'll be very, very quick. And yes, this is one of the things we stole from Shell. Yeah? One of the challenges is it's been around for a while. So I'm sure if there's Shell people in the room, you might have got a bit of a groan or an eye roll. But how do you keep people engaged in this? Yeah? How do you make sure that this is fresh for them? And it's really simple if you haven't seen it. It happens right before the job starts. Really, you just think about all of the things that could possibly happen. This is a red, yellow risk model, so you kind of colorise the risks that you have. And you really just think about what could cause the barriers to fail in your job. So you really just think about what could happen, and then you just ask some simple questions. What are those barriers? What do we need to do to keep them safe? And sometimes good practice is that you might get different people from the crew to own some of those, so they take a real ownership for it. And I think you know when you crack it with a contractor, and I think of Draco, he was one of our rigging crews that we came in. And I don't know how many of you guys know kind of hard-nosed rigging crews, but sometimes they're pretty hard-nosed. He kind of came over to me, and this is one of the ones that I'd sat in on. And he said, look, Fee, I'm just wondering, do you mind kind of tomorrow if I lead the barrier thinking? I thought it was pretty good. I said, and next week, I really want to bring the owner of the company along because I'd really like to do this in all the jobs that I do. And I think that's the other side of leveraging skills from contractors. But as owner companies, what can we share back to really lift that level? So there were just a couple of examples of how we really think about what we value. Think about that engineering crew. We're not making them do the 8-step process. They have a value for it. They're less reactive. They're in control. Right? It's kind of almost setting up for that position. Pat talked about, you only had, what was it, 100 metres to go, Pat? And you decided to turn around? You'd probably had thinking all the way before that decision. That wasn't a just on the fly, right? So this is the value driving and supporting all of the systems, and also thinking about the way we do things around here. And do you want that to be kind of proud? I think there was an example really early on. Wouldn't it be great if you could walk in to an organisation and it didn't have your logo anywhere, but it just felt like the organisation you work for? I was fortunate enough to work for Shell, and so I feel like I've got a pectin tattoo, not literally, but somewhere on me. I was fortunate enough to work for DuPont. I've got a DuPont logo. And one day, it's too soon, maybe there'll be a Viva Energy one too, because you're proud of that. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of questions. All right. Do you actually know who your key contractors are and what's important for them? And what kind of mechanisms are you going to look to engage? But importantly, is there actual alignment with what you're thinking and what you're doing and with what everyone else is thinking and doing? And that's the opportunity for working together, because it's not just about the individual, but it's about the collective. So really thank you for the time that you've provided today, and I hope it's provided a couple of triggers and a couple of really practical in-field tools that might be useful for you. So thank you very much.